everyone, thanks for joining me again. Are you ready to take a look through 2 more classic issues of White Dwarf? I know you are. Come on, let's take a dive.
Okay, here we go. November 1986, November 1991. Let's crack out the old one first. Lovely front cover image here. Recognisable Night Panther by no other than John Blanche. One of those beautiful homages to a historical painting there. One of Napoleon's generals, I believe, is the original. Redone in medieval style by the master John Blanche himself. And not originally meant as a Warhammer piece, but then the Knights Panther were kind of co-opted into Warhammer lore. Here we have some Vikings, some of which I have recently acquired as part of the Warriors Combat Cards set. So nice to see them arriving here. Arriving alongside the recent Feudal releases. So that's an interesting chronology, but there you go. Yeah, interesting. On the contents page here, we've got this rather strange upside down reference. It's a long way to Tipperary. Yeah, we will get to that. And you think maybe it's a mistake. Maybe they pasted it upside down, but it's a bit too obvious to be a mistake. It's not a mistake. No prizes for guessing what it's going to be relating to rules-wise, game system-wise. Here we have Open Box reviewing the new D&D Immortals rules. So what you do when you've got right to the very top of the D&D pantheon, when you are no longer a regular adventurer at all and have achieved immortality, and the various changes that are made to the rules at that point. And not something I would want to go that far with a D&D campaign. I quite like low-level characters, but I guess it's the logical conclusion if you've been playing a character for a long time and they've made it that far. The Warlock of Firetop Mountain board game from Games Workshop gets a nice review from Robert Neville, recognising that it's part Cluedo and part a game like TSR's Dungeon that came out at the time. But yes, I enjoy it. It's a fun game, nevertheless. Spawn of Azathoth, a Call of Cthulhu adventure, which, according to Peter Green, doesn't go close to approaching the wonder that is Masks of Nyarlathotep, but nevertheless is an interesting read, if rather padded out. This is the conclusion, the verdict on it here. And Merp, the second US edition, building on the Games Workshop edition to be released in the States. Open Box continues with GURPS, the advent of the it's the General something role-playing system, isn't it? General Universal Role-Playing System. There you go. Yep. It doesn't rate particularly highly, according to the views of Marcus L. Rowland, but a lot of that is because of its modular nature and how much of it is not included in the core rulebook, because it's intended that you buy the bits of the book that are relevant to the system that you're playing or the setting that you're playing in. So the core system in and of itself doesn't give necessarily what you need in order to play a game. And Midnight at the Well of Souls reviewed by Phil Francis, particularly unfavourably, hopelessly derivative, confused, and just downright weird, apparently. So definitely one for your collections there. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Adventures book gets a good review. The generic play aid for Fantasy Cities from Chaosium gets a middling review, depending on what kind of thing you're buying it for. An Introduction to Starfleet Battles gets a somewhat technical review, and the revised Recon role-playing game from Palladium gets a very Palladium type of review. Last issue, we had this lovely in-colour John Sibbick painting, and we will be encountering that again later in the book. But just in case you have forgotten the cover of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, here it is in black and white with a bit more of a synopsis. A Day in the Life of Sector 255 for Dread takes an approach that I think is rather fresh and quite enjoyable for a Judge Dredd game, in that it's not one central crime with one central perp. It's lots of different, totally unconnected crimes that are going on throughout the day that just happen to intersect in a coincidental way to make life hard for the players. So I can imagine this game working really nicely. Lots of running around, lots of trying to deal with different situations with lingering effects occupying your time when you should be moving on to deal with the next thing. And all of it done with a lovely sense of humour that is very 2000 AD. Very enjoyable little scenario, that one. Here we have, in addition to a discussion of Aliens, review of Aliens, which has just come out at this point, and a review of Big Trouble in Little China as well. Very nice there, alongside a few other things that are a bit weirder, like Basil the Great Mouse Detective, and some other films that you won't necessarily have heard of unless you're a fan of B-movies, which you probably are. Here are these Vikings again, that range of Vikings pictured on the inside cover. So Rasmus, now available from Wargames Foundry, the Archer. I had to pick up him recently. Citric, Bearsark, who is actually called Bearsark in the combat cards deck, so that obviously stuck quite well. Not quite Eric, it's a variation on him that came later, I think. And not quite Cool Dolph, another variant on him with a longer cloak and a club rather than a sword, but were the things that I needed to pick up. And a host more Citadel miniatures here. The Young Fire Dragon, not my favourite orcs, not my favourite troglodytes or mind flayers, but some lovely night horrors here. The limited edition Tin Man and Oxyacetylene, which is going to be relevant later in this issue. Some dwarf villagers, some men-at-arms, and not my favourite Lord of the Rings range either. So not the best selection of Citadel stuff to be coming out. Now here we are. Don't adjust your set. I shall adjust my set. There we go. Right, here we are. This is Tipperary. It's a long way to Tipperary. Getting from A to B in Paranoia. Yes. There for no other reason than it makes you flip the book upside down. It's got to be a Paranoia article. And rather than being a scenario for Paranoia, this is just some suggestions for how to make life a bit more awkward for your players, because that's what Paranoia is all about, right? How to make getting from A to B more difficult. It starts off with the premise that if something's happening in a part of the sector, your players can start off by going, well, we'll go there, and then we'll look at this, and they're like, okay, how are you getting there? This is how to bog the adventure down before you've even got started. With the PC runaround chart here, which requires various bits of paperwork for you to pursue in circles before you can finally get a car, can finally get some fuel, can finally get on your way, or you navigate the tube, or you walk there, and the various other things that you find along the way that you may or may not have clearance for, and that the computer may or may not approve of. We're back with experience levels in D&D here, counting the cost. Although it claims to be a new experience system, not really a new experience system, but a new way of pointing advancements and various skills advancements and characteristic advancements and that kind of thing in D&D to try and give it a bit more of a realistic feel, I guess, although it all comes down to the maths, because it's D&D, right? So it all comes down to semi-complicated maths, which wouldn't be my favourite way of doing experience points, but there you go. Here is the Crude, the Mad, and the Rusty with this rather lovely board here, which lets you use Oxyacetylene and the Tin Man alongside Scrag the Slaughterer and a couple of Goblin Fanatics. And it's a version of Warhammer Fantasy that uses this grid along with the rules for Scrag and Tin Man and Oxyacetylene and all the rest of them, and a Chaos Dwarf called Wotan, along with some background, but it's a bit it's a bit odd because it gives things like, as a Chaos Dwarf, Wotan does not hate goblinoids. Well, that's relevant because there's fanatics in the game. Nor does he suffer animosity towards elves. Well, there's no elves in this scenario, so why would you even mention that? I don't know, random. And it's not the prettiest map to play on in the world, but could be entertaining nonetheless. And you can pick up those models in this special offer. All of these models for £4. Very nice. Tasty that is. Rules for knocking things out in Call of Cthulhu, recognising that in pulp detective novels it's very easy, or at least very common, for people to be knocked out and to come around a little bit later and find that something has changed, or they're missing something, or something's been taken. Whereas in Call of Cthulhu, there isn't really rules for knocking people out. It's more just damaging and death. So here's some rules for how to knock people out in game. Interesting though that there need to be rules for it. I mean, surely a GM would just impose that if it was a relevant thing to happen. Anyway, rules for knocking people out in black. In there. Here is the Black Knight, a short adventure for Pendragon, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and AD&D. So obviously, if it's covering Pendragon and Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and AD&D, it's quite uninvolved in its lore, but this does involve a troll raid. So if you're playing Pendragon, I guess you're playing Pendragon in a sort of semi-fantasy setting. Although at least it has magical trolls involved in it, and yeah, wizards. Well, wizards are in Pendragon anyway, aren't they? So this is this deals with a village which has been left ravaged and poor in the wake of some troll thefts that some valiant knights have tried to liberate, but the townsfolk have not been kind to these knights, have not really wanted to be liberated or not appreciated the knights' efforts, and some swords have been stolen, and so now the curse of the knights is resting upon the village. And as a noble adventurer, you have, of course, to step in and source it out for them and help everybody get better. Here's a very small page of illuminations into foray into the art crypts. Art crypts? No, crypts. Crypts. There you go, I should say crypts properly, not crisps. This is John Civic, your friend of mine, John Civic, who also, not obviously appearing here, but noteworthy, did the cover of the current edition of the Woods book, which was, he was a wonderful guy to work with. His paintings are beautiful as always, and here's a small selection of them, the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay cover, Realm of Chaos, some strange creature on a book jacket here, and a dragon piece, but sadly not huge amounts. Here's another look at psionic combat in D&D, AD&D in fact, trying to make psionic combat a bit more different from regular combat, a bit more, shall we say, realistic. One of those attempts. Another granule to add to your granular system should you wish to chuck it in. Here is a mad scientist trying to defeat Thrud the Barbarian by creating a mechanical warrior, but not a waterproof mechanical warrior. Here's some black and white heavy metal, which is rather sad, but this is in fact a page of greens. So all of these photos are photos of the original green sculpts of things like Trish Morrison's Dragon here, Jez Goodwin's Chimera, some of the Gothic horror miniatures from Kev Adams, a bunch of trolls, some Chaos Warriors, and so on and so forth. And this article on heavy metal is somewhat about sculpting miniatures, although actually it's not really about how to sculpt miniatures, it's more about the sculptors themselves. A bit of background on all of them, and the process of how a figure goes from being sculpted from an armature here to being sculpted to going into a mold press. But a little bit cursory, but it's nice to have those pictures. It's a shame they're not in colour, but I guess they would have just been in green, wouldn't they? So maybe not that interesting. A mixed bag of letters pages here. Some of them humorous. Some of them humorous, although probably intended not to be humorous. A short blow-by-blow account of Games Day 86 from Paul Mason, including some rather interesting alien-looking beasties there. And there we are, the end of White Dwarf 83, November 1986. So let us move on to 5 years later, White Dwarf 143, November 1991. The release of the Dragon Masters game there, with slightly more Games Workshop stalls than there were 5 years ago, for sure. With Games Day 91 getting some coloured photos, no aliens on display here, just lots of games being played. The Reader's Survey Mega Prize Draw has not been filled out, so there's still hope. We can still win all of these goodies. Yeah, right. An advert for D-Rock, an album on the Warhammer record label, the short-lived Warhammer record label. Some iconic Marauder miniatures here, the Dwarf Hammerers and the Treeman. A little bit of news, and then we're into Space Marine with rules for Stompers, Dreadnoughts, Chaos Androids, Shock Attack Gun, Eldar Wraithguard, Eldar Dreadnoughts, Mole Mortars, Space Marine Dreadnoughts, Grey Knights, Chaos Dreadnoughts, and the data cards for all of those things. Most of these plastic miniatures that appeared in various boxes that were perhaps not covered in the base game because of their subsequent release. An advert for Terror in the Dark, the first adventure supplement for Advanced Hero Quest, and of course the only adventure supplement released for Advanced Hero Quest. In the Heavy Metal page here, we've got the first Space Marines that I ever came across, because these were in the news sheet promotional sheet thing that was inside Space Crusade and Hero Quest. So when I got my copy of Hero Quest, these guys were on the bottom of the Space Crusade side, and so this was my first experience of painted Space Marines, and I keep meaning to do some replica jobs of these, and these guys are in Warhammer World, or at least they were last time I was there on a cabinet in Warhammer World, so it was really great to see those in person. And of course the chaplain is featured on the cover here with that sort of blood drinking skeleton banner, and the Blood Angels land speeder also very prominent on the cover here. So don't know which came first, but no coincidence that the two appear side by side in there. Here's another classic, iconic, shall I say, modelling article building the coaching in. That two-part model, the big coaching in itself, and then the stable block and the forge next to it, which I still haven't built for mine actually. I've built the coaching in, but I haven't built the block that runs alongside it. But I'm sure most of you will have at some point or another had a go at making the coaching in from these templates. It is one of those staple bits of old hammer terrain that we see time and time again, always made beautifully, always looking great. It's hard to make a bad one. It's a really nice, quite simple but really lovely kit. Here is some initial sketches for Man of War from John Blanche again, some of which are recognisable from the models that came out, some of which are very different from the models which eventually came out in Man of War. I first mentioned Man of War in White Dwarf. Here's a Space Marine battle report, so I guess to go alongside those rules that we've just seen. This is the Latop Craft World versus the Blood Angels. Blood Angels really being the Space Marine chapter of the era at this point. Everything is about the Blood Angels. There are those mighty hosts. Another Robin Jews induced battle report to show how the games work, which seem to have worked particularly well, although they did eventually move to the back of the magazine. At the moment they're still sort of dotted throughout at random points in the magazine. This one occupying the centre pages, and quite a lot of the centre pages. This is quite an epic, in many more ways than one, battle report. Some more epic heavy metal. And then we have a discussion of Imperial Guard colour schemes. This is mostly tanks, tank company colour schemes. So again, related to Epic, although it's obviously easier for them to show a page of Epic tanks than it is for them to show a page of 40k tanks, particularly as the plastic 40k tanks were only just really beginning to roll out beyond the basic Rhino and Land Raider. So it would have been hard for them to show tank companies of any great scale in 40k. And here are some of those rules for Epic, along with their data cards. So a very Epic focused edition, this one. Here's that land speeder without the carapace and with options of Imperial Guard or Space Marine pilots. Lots of mixed bag of Space Marines here. You can see these are designed by the Citadel design team. This was, even at this point, when you've got this artwork, that's very formalized, the style of what Space Marines look like. Even at this point, they're still selling these models, which are the sort of prototype selection of Space Marines. They're a little bit diverse in their armour. Their helmets are quite different from one another. They don't all have the same greaves and plates. They're a mixed bag, but more conformity is coming. And then here are those Epic plastics. The Epic Stomper Sprue that includes all of those Chaos Androids and Dreadnoughts and other bits that we got the rules for earlier on. And there is that marvellous coaching in, doing some publicity on the background with some Bretonnian Knights that we saw in a previous issue, and the Undead that we saw also in a previous issue. So building up as they go. There you go. That is a quick flip through. 2 classic White Dwarf issues. Oh, with an advance. This is not one we looked at. This is what we're going to look at next week. So more Bretonnians, different Bretonnians. There you go. Old Bretonnians, new Bretonnians. So that's what we're going to look at next week. But this one and this one. There we go. Join me for that next week. In the meantime, take care. Have a good one. And I'll see you then.